Hello, so in this video we're going to take a look at further application with understanding file privileges, as well as start combining it with some previous content we had looked at, which was creating users. So we'll start to see how users across a couple different accounts might be able to interact with some of these files and where that might be important. I'd also alluded to in a previous video how there are certain files or directories built into the file system that also might require special privileges in order to access. So we'll start taking a look at what some of those might be as well, and why they might be important. So as a quick recap, remember on our Ubuntu side, we're logged in as NSA, and inside our home folder, we created this folder 1 and this folder 2. All this was found in our home directory. And previously we had created, or we had started messing around with the file privileges associated with a file inside folder 1. And we could see this through an ls-l. So if I did an ls-l of folder 1, okay, remember in here we have this test file, and this is where I was messing around with the privileges for this particular location. In comparison, I had created an identical folder 2 with a test file, with the same exact test file inside folder 2. If I check the privileges of this, just for comparison, ls-l of folder 2's version of test, you'll see that this is where we had actually modified the privileges. So I ended up changing it from read and write access to only read and execute access for myself, and I gave everyone else only read access. That's specifically for the folder 1 for the test file inside of that. Whereas for folder 2, you see it was still with the default of read write, and then read only for everyone else. And I've left my little reference up here in case we wanted to change that. So let's see how I could change this maybe for one of the folders, in a more efficient fashion than what we saw before. It's very common that you're going to want to change privileges for a directory and everything within the directory. I'm sure you can imagine, what if I had 10 files in here? What if I had 20 files in here? You wouldn't want to go through and change them all one at a time. We'd want a more efficient way to actually do that. So I'm going to leave my folder 1 in my test file inside there. I'll leave that one alone from our previous example. And in folder 2 and folder 2 test, that's where I'm going to start changing everything all at once. So the way that we'll do this is, let's make another file inside folder 2 just to kind of mimic what if I had 10 files. And I'll do this through the echo command. So I'll echo some information, hello everyone, and I'll send this to the folder 2 / and I'll make a file called test2, just so we have something else inside folder 2. Okay, so now when I do my ls-l of folder 2, okay, you'll be able to see I have two different files in there, one called test and one called test2, just to give us a couple different examples to work with. So now we're going to see, what if I wanted to change the permissions of folder 2 as well as everything inside folder 2. We took a look at last time how we had this chmod command that we could take a look at. And if I wanted to change the permissions so that everyone could access everything in this particular location, how do you do that? What we would do is we'd add in the -R, and this means we're going to go through recursively and change the permissions for the directory as well as everything inside the directory as well. So I'll do a -R, and let's say I want to give full permissions to everyone. That would be 777 of my folder 2 location. Okay, so if I go ahead and do this, hit enter. Now let's go ahead and check the permissions of everything inside folder 2. And you see how we now have read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute for both test1 or test as well as test2. So really useful command to change privileges for an entire directory. Now in this particular case, this is just to get a little bit more practice, I'd like to remove permissions. I'd like to say, let's say folder 1 was where I have some more public information, and folder 2 information is really just for me. Only I want to be able to access this stuff. So how would we do that? Just like before, I'll do my chmod, I'll do -R, and how would I do this? Let's say I want to give myself, remember the first number is for my own user, I'll give myself full permissions by giving myself a 7, and then I'll make everyone else, users in my group, have 0, and all other users have 0, which means no permission as well, and that'll be of everything inside folder 2. Okay, so we'll run the permissions like that, and now when I hit my up arrow twice and take a look at those, you'll see my test and my test2 file, they both have full read, write, execute for me, but not for any other users. Okay, so I've kind of limited access to this particular location and being able to read these files. Just to be able to make sure that this is still working, if I do a cat of, let's say, folder 2 and I'll take a look at my test2, that new file that I went and echoed out, you see, yes, I can actually access that hello everyone. So now let's combine this with creating another user and kind of see where we can go from there. So if you remember, we add another user through the add user command, and that's something that requires the elevated privileges. So I'll do sudo add user, and just like before, I'll just make one called testing. Okay, won't be too creative with this. We'll come up with a password. Oh, we got to have our password for NSA to be able to have the elevated privileges. Okay, we're now creating testing, this new user. I'm going to make a password for him called hello, and another password, retype it, hello, just a simple password. I won't have any default information. I won't give him a name or work numbers or anything like that. Say yes, and I now have this new testing user that's been created. Remember, we could check his home directory by doing something like an ls/home, and that would show that I now have this this home directory that's now been created for testing as opposed to NSA. So now that I've got this new user, let's try switching over to that user and seeing how we can interact with some of these privileges. Okay, so an example of this would be we can switch users, remember, through the su command. So I'll do su testing. Okay, I'm going to switch users over to testing, and my testing password I just made was hello. Su to testing, and I'm now acting as testing. And how do you verify that you're actually doing that? Remember, we had the who am I command, who am I, and that says, hey, you're acting as testing. So I'm logged into the computer as NSA, but through this terminal right now, I'm acting as testing. Okay, and you notice that's what changed my directories as well. My directory, although I was operating out of the home directory for NSA, it now writes out the file path because that's not testing's home directory. And do you remember how I could switch quickly to testing's home directory? Remember, we could do that through a cd and then the tilde. And now I'm in the print working directory, pwd. You see now I'm at /home/testing, okay, being able to switch between the two. Okay, so let's take this a step further and start combining this with some of the privileges. So if you remember, we just created a file as NSA in a particular folder, that folder 2, and that's where we were changing the privileges. So now that I'm acting as testing, let's see if when I go over to, if I try to cat out that information like before, I'm going to cat out /home/NSA, and then we had folder 2, and in here we had a file like test2, something like that. I'm going to try catting this information out, and you see before, when I was logged in as NSA, it was able to spit out that new file, but now it says permission denied. Okay, no, we did not have the authority to actually read this because we changed the authority for all other users to be a 0. NSA would be the only one who would be able to kind of give us privileges to that, that location. Next would be able to see, okay, we created this new user. Can the user act as a root user? Can he act as an administrator and say, well, I'm going to do an override. Let me try running this command with elevated privileges by doing the sudo. So I do sudo cat. And maybe if I could override the fact that I don't have permission by acting as an administrator, maybe this would actually give me permission. And is this going to work? Let's take a look. Folder 2, test2. You see when we run this, it says, hey, enter your password, and let's see if you're allowed to do this or not. And it says testing is not in the sudoers file. This incident will be reported. Uh-oh. All right, so you see there we were acting as test user, trying to act as the administrator, and it comes and it spits out this message saying you're not in the sudoers file. So in other words, you do not have permission. You are not on the list of users to whom can act with elevated privileges. So now this kind of gives us a little bit of a sneak peek at a particular file on the computer, the sudoers file. And that's a particular file that you need to have root access in order to actually interact with this file. So why don't we take a look at that particular file. So that particular file we can take a look at is located ls//etc/sudoers. And you see in here there is a file. It has read access for root/etc/sudoers. So here we have a file that if you're acting as a root user, you could interact with it, but you won't be able to if you're just a lowly user like testing. So a perfect example with something like this would be, let's say I wanted to actually see who's part of that file. Let's say I want to make a change to it or something. And if you remember, we had something like nano or VI or Vim that I could interact with this file. So let me see if I can interact with this file here, /etc/sudoers. And what's going to happen? You see error reading file, permission denied. So this is something that my particular user, I can't even go in and read this file as testing. So I hit Control X to be able to exit that as nano, or do your :Q enter if you used VI. So we're starting to see here how there are some other files on your system that I might be able to see that the file exists, but I won't be able to interact with the contents at all because this particular user just doesn't have permissions to do that. So let's, I'm going to hit my exit command, and my exit is going to switch me back to NSA. And we saw that NSA does have permission to interact. They do have the permission to run as the root user. So why don't I try that same thing, interacting with this particular file by typing out nano/etc/sudoers. Okay, and you see, like before, it's going to say permission denied. Okay, so why did that happen? Why did we get a permission denied when this particular NSA user does have the authority to do that? And of course the answer is because although we do have the authority, remember you have to explicitly say every time you want to act with that authority. So let's try the same command again. I'm going to try running the program, but this time we do sudo before it. So I'm going to do sudo nano/etc/sudoers. Okay, and this time it says, now you do have permissions to actually access this file as you're acting with the elevated privileges. Now the way that this kind of works is you can scroll down here a little bit. I'm just hitting my down arrows through the file, and you'll be able to see that most of this has been commented out. A lot of this is it does not apply to they're just notes behind the scenes saying how you can interact with this. Now the one that's of interest is you'll see here there is one that's not commented that starts with root. So this is saying anyone whose root is part of the root user has full permissions. This all equals all parentheses :all. Okay, so all that's what you would write to actually say this particular individual, this particular user has full privileges to everything. You'll also see anybody who's part of the admin group. Members of the admin group may also gain root privileges. And then finally allows members of group sudo to also execute a command. So there's two different groups as well as one user who's actually here in this sudoers file. Now this would, usually you would want to take a user and add them to a group, but just as a quick little reference, let's say I wanted to cheat. Let's say I'm the hacker and I'm getting into the system and I want to give an account that I've made, a lowly account, full privileges, something like testing. I could take something like testing and add him to the list, and then also have this same syntax of all equals all :all parentheses all. So I'm trying to give him full access to everything as well. I'm going to hit Control X and say yes, we're going to write these changes. Yes, we're going to rewrite over this file. So now I've added in another user to the sudoers file. So now let's switch back to my testing and see, does he actually have some elevated privileges now that he's been added to the sudoers file. I'm going to SU over to testing. And I'm going to say my password was hello. Now I'm acting as testing. And remember, we had that folder 1 and folder 2 where I wasn't actually able to. So if I do a cat out of folder 2/test2, I was trying to read out this test file. You see there it said permission denied. Okay, what if I actually try running this now with sudo cat folder 2/test2, and it's going to say what's your password? My password is hello, and now it actually spits out that information, hello everyone. So we're learning that sudoers file is really important to know what users and what groups have been added to that file, because that's going to say, even though I've set that particular file to not have access for all of the users, because I can run with elevated privileges, it kind of overrides that and allows my testing user, my lowly testing user, to still be able to read something that they otherwise would not have access to. So watching that sudoers file, having a backup of that, especially if I'm in an active attack and defense type scenario, is really, really important to maintaining who's on that list. Another little trick with that particular file, and again, if you remember, the testing user didn't actually have authority to interact with that file, and now that they've been added to the list, now they will. So I'll go back to sudo nano/etc/sudoers. So now he can actually interact with this file as well. If you see here, he's been added to the list. A nice little trick that a lot of times a hacker might try to do is they'll hit enter a whole bunch of times, and they'll space all the way down here to the bottom of the file, and then that's where they might add in another user as well. So being able to make sure that no changes have been made to this file is pretty important, because even if they're way down at the bottom of the list, the computer doesn't care. If they're somewhere in this file, then they are going to be added to the list of who's allowed to operate with elevated privileges. So I'm going to kind of delete my own privileges here. I'm logged in as testing, and I'm just going to kind of remove him from the list, so he's no longer going to be added to the list. I'll hit Control X and say yes. We'll save this. We'll overwrite this file. So I just had privileges to be able to interact with this, and now if I try running this again, running that same command, it's going to be, hey, you're not in the file anymore. You don't have permission to actually do this. And likewise with that cat command where I was spitting out contents of a file that wasn't actually mine, it's going to say, no, you don't actually have permissions to do this. So we're starting to see here how across a couple different accounts, what permissions you're operating as, and do you have the ability to act with elevated permissions is really important for interacting with files. We should also now get pretty familiar with if you're running commands and it says that permission is denied. It just means that this is a particular command or this is a particular file that you need elevated privileges to interact with that. So you need to be logged on as a user that's capable of doing that, and that sudo command is really important for doing that. Let's just get some more practice and kind of clean up what we're doing. Okay, I'm going to type exit to go back to my my NSA user. So now when I type exit and I do a who am I, I'm now operating as NSA. And if you remember, we had this delete command, user delete command. I could do a sudo user del, user del command and do testing. I'm going to delete my testing user. And I'll do a -r to kind of clean up any of the folders and stuff that he had made as well. Okay, and now I was able to actually delete that testing user that we just made just for this example, and kind of confirm this by doing an ls of my home directory, and I'll see, yeah, I've deleted his home directory as well. So lots of practice with files and privileges, and this is where a lot of the, it just takes experience to know which are the important locations. We've just seen another one here, the /etc/sudoers, very important file to pay attention to. As well as kind of understanding how to build out privileges. So in future videos, we'll start taking a look at some more locations, what might be useful for an attacker, what are some things that are useful for services, and kind of continue to expand our knowledge here of the Linux file structure.